The diplomatic shuttle glided through Earth's thick atmosphere, its sleek silver hull reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. Inside, Commander Zera of the Velian Dominion stood with her arms crossed, her emerald eyes narrowed as she gazed at the planet below. She had never considered Earth worthy of her presence. Her kind, tall, powerful, and bred for war, had conquered countless worlds. Their strength was unquestioned. Yet, the Dominion had decided to form an alliance with humans, these fragile beings with their soft bodies and primitive ideas of strength. Weak, she muttered under her breath. That was the only word that came to mind when she thought of them. Their obsession with protection amused her. They wore armor in battle, as if their flesh wasn't meant to endure pain. They hid behind shields instead of standing their ground. And worst of all, they acted as if emotional bonds were something to cherish. The very idea was laughable. As the shuttle landed with a gentle hum, the doors hissed open, revealing a large human spaceport filled with uniformed personnel. Zera stepped forward, her movements fluid yet commanding. The moment her boots touched the ground, she straightened her shoulders, towering over most of the humans present. Their eyes flickered with a mix of curiosity and unease, and she relished the silent confirmation of her superiority. A lone figure approached. His stride was confident yet relaxed. Unlike the others, he wasn't dressed in stiff military attire, but in casual clothes that clung to his athletic frame. His dark hair was slightly messy, as if he had better things to do than worry about appearances. And his eyes, they held a sharpness she hadn't expected, a quiet strength. "So, you're the Velian envoy," he said, his voice steady but laced with something she couldn't quite place. She tilted her head, assessing him. "I am Commander Zera of the Dominion." He didn't flinch at her title, nor did he lower his gaze. "Interesting. Name's Dane," he said simply. "I'll be your cultural liaison while you're on Earth." Her lips curled into a smirk. "A babysitter?" "Think of it as protection," he replied, his tone light, but with a teasing glint in his eyes. Zera laughed, a sharp sound that drew the attention of those nearby. "Protection? You believe I, a Dominion warrior, need protection from humans?" She took a slow step forward, closing the distance between them. "I could break you with a flick of my wrist." Dane didn't back away. If anything, he seemed amused. "And yet, here you are on our planet, part of our diplomatic exchange. Maybe there's more to humans than you think." She narrowed her eyes. Bold, most creatures wilted under her gaze, but this human met it with unshaken confidence. It irritated her and intrigued her. "Come on," he said, motioning for her to follow. "I'll show you around, unless you're too afraid to walk among us unprotected." Zera scoffed but fell into step beside him. This assignment was going to be interesting. The days on Earth passed in a blur of unfamiliar sights, irritating customs, and the constant presence of Dane. Zera had expected her time here to be dull, a meaningless exercise in pretending to understand these fragile creatures. Instead, she found herself increasingly fascinated and annoyed by the human assigned to her. He had a way of getting under her skin, always meeting her sharp words with an infuriating smirk and never hesitating to challenge her beliefs. She had seen humans cower before her, their gazes lowered in respect or fear. But Dane? He looked at her as if she were just another person, and that infuriated her more than anything. "You're brooding," he commented one evening as they walked through a bustling marketplace. The air was filled with the rich, smoky scent of food, and humans milled about, laughing and talking, completely unaware of how easily they could be crushed. Zera shot him a glare. "I do not brood." Dane chuckled. "Oh, you definitely do. You get this little crease right here." He reached out, his fingers grazing her brow before she swatted his hand away. "Touch me again, human, and you'll lose that hand," she warned. His grin didn't waver. Noted. She hated the way her pulse quickened whenever he got too close, the warmth that spread through her chest when he spoke to her as an equal. She had spent her entire life among warriors, where relationships were strategic and power was the only currency that mattered. But Dane? He treated her as if she were someone worth knowing beyond her title. It unsettled her more than she cared to admit. One night, that unsettling feeling turned into something more. It started as another one of their endless arguments. They stood outside the human base, the city's skyline twinkling in the distance. "You act like strength is just about muscles and battle experience," Dane said, leaning against a railing with his arms crossed. "But you don't get it. Humans protect the things they love. Not because we're weak, but because that's real strength." Zera scoffed. "Love is a distraction. It makes you vulnerable." He studied her for a long moment. "Or maybe you're just afraid of it." Her hands curled into fists. "I fear nothing." "Then prove it." Before she could demand what he meant, he moved, swift and decisive. His fingers brushed her cheek, his body closing the space between them. And then his lips pressed against hers, firm yet gentle. Zera's first instinct was to shove him away, to reassert her dominance. But the moment she made contact with his chest, she hesitated. He was strong, not in the way her people were, not in brute force, but in resilience, in the quiet, unshakable confidence that had drawn her to him from the beginning. She didn't pull away. Instead, she deepened the kiss, gripping his collar and yanking him closer, letting herself, just this once, surrender to something she didn't understand. Dane exhaled against her lips, his hands resting on her waist, steady and grounding. When they finally parted, she stared at him, her heart pounding. "You humans," she murmured, her voice unsteady. "You have the strangest way of proving your strength." Dane smiled. "And you're just starting to figure that out." She didn't respond. She wasn't sure she had the words for what she was feeling. But for the first time since she'd arrived, she wasn't entirely certain of her superiority. And that was more terrifying than any battle she'd ever fought. Zera had always prided herself on control of her body, her emotions, every aspect of her existence. Yet, as she stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection with narrowed eyes, she felt anything but in control. Her body was changing. The evidence was undeniable. The subtle rounding of her abdomen, the waves of energy that came and went, the strange tenderness she had never experienced before. A child, a human Velian hybrid. She pressed a palm to her stomach, a foreign sense of vulnerability creeping into her bones. She had always scoffed at human fragility, yet here she was, experiencing it firsthand. Her people did not conceive easily, not without planning, genetic alignment, and approval from the Dominion. But humans, they had a way of disrupting the natural order, of forcing change where there should have been none. And Dane, she exhaled sharply. She had avoided him for weeks, unable to bring herself to face him, to admit what had happened. Not just a child growing inside her, but the truth she had refused to acknowledge. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped seeing him as insignificant. Somewhere along the way, she had started wanting more. A sharp knock on the door made her tense. She didn't need to ask who it was. "Zera." Dane's voice came from the other side. "I know you're in there. Open the door." She clenched her jaw, debating whether to ignore him. But Dane was relentless, and she knew he wouldn't leave. With a frustrated sigh, she crossed the room and pressed the panel, letting the door slide open. The moment he saw her, his expression shifted. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by something quieter, more serious. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze flickering to her stomach before returning to her face. "So," he said, his voice unreadable, "you were going to keep avoiding me forever, huh?" She folded her arms over her chest, trying to summon her usual sharpness. "It is none of your concern." Dane's brow lifted. "None of my concern?" He let out a dry laugh, stepping forward. "Zera, that's my child, isn't it?" The word sent a strange, unfamiliar pang through her chest. She had expected anger, disbelief, maybe even fear, but not this steady, unwavering certainty. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Dane exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Why didn't you tell me?" She turned away, staring out the window at the human city below. Because it changes nothing. I am a Dominion warrior. I do not need protection. Dane cut in, stepping closer. Is that what you're about to say? Her fingers curled into fists. I do not need weakness. Damn it, Zera. His voice was suddenly rough, raw with something she couldn't quite name. Loving someone isn't weakness. Being willing to fight for them isn't weakness. You think humans are fragile, but we fight like hell for the things that matter. She squeezed her eyes shut. I don't know how to be like you. Dane was silent for a moment. Then, gently, he placed a hand over hers, right where it rested against her stomach. His warmth seeped into her skin, steady and unshakable. You don't have to be like me, he murmured. You just have to let yourself feel it. Her throat tightened. For the first time in her life, Zera felt truly unarmored. Not because she was weak, but because Dane had taught her that strength was something far greater than power alone. Zera had faced countless battles in her lifetime. She had led troops into war, stood against enemies who towered over her, and defied death more times than she could count. But nothing had ever prepared her for this moment. She lay in a dimly lit medical chamber, her breathing heavy, her body trembling from the sheer force of what she had just endured. The room was quiet now, save for the soft beeping of human medical monitors and the rapid beating of her own heart. And then, there it was, a sound so small, so fragile, yet more powerful than any war cry she had ever heard. A cry. Her child's cry. She turned her head, and there, in the arms of a human doctor, was a tiny being that had shattered every belief she had ever held. A child, not just of the Velian Dominion, nor solely of Earth, but of both worlds. Proof that something new, something stronger, could exist between them. The doctor carefully placed the newborn into her arms, and for the first time in her life, Zera felt something stronger than power, deeper than duty. She felt love. The small weight against her chest was impossibly warm, impossibly real. Her child had dark strands of hair like Dane's, but their eyes, when they fluttered open, held the luminous glow of her own people, a perfect blend of both their worlds. Dane was beside her in an instant, his gaze flickering from her face to their child. For once, he had no teasing remark, no smug grin. He just stared, silent and awestruck. She's perfect, he murmured. Zera swallowed hard, unable to look away from the delicate creature in her arms. She is small. Dane let out a soft chuckle. Most babies are. She hesitated before whispering, and fragile. Dane shook his head. No, not fragile, just new. He reached out, brushing a calloused thumb over the tiny fingers curled into a fist. She'll be strong, Zera. Like you. Zera exhaled, a strange, aching warmth spreading through her chest. Strength. She had always believed it came from battle, from power, from never bending, never breaking. But this was something greater. She looked at Dane, then truly looked at him. And for the first time, she understood. This was what he had been trying to show her all along. Not all protection was weakness. Not all love was a vulnerability. Some things were worth protecting. Some things were worth fighting for. And as she cradled their child, feeling Dane's steady presence beside her, Zera finally knew she would fight for this. For them, for the first time in her life, she was unafraid. She had found something stronger than war. She had found a home,